The stage was set for a nostalgic segment on Good Morning America, as cameras panned over the audience, filled with fans eager to see the legendary Chuck Norris. The appearance was meant to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Walker, Texas Ranger, and a new charity initiative he was launching for veterans. Dressed in his trademark denim jacket and boots, Norris arrived with the steady calm of a man who had stared down Hollywood villains, real martial arts legends, and aging itself. George Stephanopoulos greeted him warmly at first. But beneath the surface, there was tension. Rumors had swirled about Chuck's controversial opinions shared in a recent podcast, particularly regarding modern media, masculinity, and what he called America's spiritual weakness. The producers had instructed George to nudge Chuck on those topics, just enough to stir up buzz. What followed, however, was far more than a nudge. It was a head-on collision between two cultural forces, and neither man backed down. Asterisk, the interview began light enough. George smiled, asking, "Chuck, how does it feel to be the man behind 1,000 memes?" Chuck chuckled politely. "It's flattering, but I'd rather be remembered for helping real people, not just jokes." The audience clapped. George moved on. "Let's talk about your new Veterans Initiative." Chuck described the foundation with passion. But as George glanced at his cue cards, the shift began. "Some say your recent remarks about modern men being too soft were out of step with today's values," George said, tone tightening. Chuck's expression changed. "That's your opinion. I call it truth," the audience murmured. George pressed again. "Do you think comments like that help bring people together or drive them apart?" Chuck leaned forward, voice calm but firm. "I didn't come here for political spin, George. I came here to help veterans." It was subtle, but the challenge had been issued. George blinked. "It's not spin, it's journalism." Chuck crossed his arms. "Depends on the channel." Asterisk suddenly. The energy in the studio changed. The friendly crowd turned silent. George tried to regain control. "Chuck, with all due respect, you're on Good Morning America, one of the most respected platforms in the country. We ask questions." Chuck didn't flinch. "Respect has to be earned. And last I checked, veterans aren't getting much of that from the media." Gasps echoed across the set. George's face stiffened. "We cover veterans all the time." Chuck nodded slowly, "and still bury stories that don't fit the narrative." A heavy beat passed. The teleprompter froze. One of the producers gave a cut sign, but George continued. "So you think we're part of the problem?" Chuck's answer came fast. "I don't think I know." The tension was now undeniable. The man who once roundhouse kicked his way through prime time was now verbally sparring with one of America's most recognized news anchors. The gloves were off, and neither was blinking. Asterisk backstage, chaos erupted in the control room. One producer whispered, "Should we dump the feed?" Another said, "No, this is gold." Meanwhile, on stage, Chuck took a breath. "Me here for a charity I built with blood, sweat, and my own money. And now I'm being grilled for speaking my mind." George tried to steer it back. "Chuck, no one's attacking your character. But when you say things like, 'America needs stronger men,' people hear a rejection of inclusivity." Chuck interrupted. "People hear what they want when they're too afraid to hear truth." "I didn't say less inclusive. I said stronger. Strong enough to defend their family, their values, their freedom." The audience applauded, half-hearted, unsure. George glanced at the camera, then at Chuck. "You're not above being questioned, even if you're Chuck Norris." And Chuck answered with a faint smile. "And you're not above being wrong, even if you're George Stephanopoulos." The tension had peaked. Then came the moment no one saw coming. Asterisk George stood. "Chuck, I think we've gone far enough." Chuck rose too, agreed. The two men locked eyes. Then, in what felt like a silent agreement, George turned to the camera. "We'll be right back." The screen cut to black. But backstage, the fireworks continued. George removed his mic, saying, "This isn't Fox News. You can't hijack the segment." Chuck replied, "And you don't get to ambush your guests." Staff rushed in to separate them. A nearby intern, phone camera rolling, caught Chuck being guided to the exit while muttering, "So much for real conversation." The video leaked online within 15 minutes. Fans were split. Some cheered Chuck's refusal to be bullied by mainstream spin. Others called him toxic and out of touch. ABC released a brief statement. The segment with Mr. Norris ended earlier than planned due to scheduling constraints, but no one believed it. The war had already gone viral. *Chuck vs. George exploded on social media. On TikTok, clips of the moment Chuck said respect has to be earned were edited over dramatic music. Conservative commentators praised him. Liberal voices condemned him. Late-night comedians had a field day. Chuck Norris walked into GMA and turned it into WWE. Even The View did a segment with Joy Behar sighing, another man afraid of progress. But the story didn't die. It grew. Chuck went on a conservative podcast to clear the air, saying, "I'm not politically principled." George declined to comment publicly, but off-camera insiders said he felt blindsided. The media had a new battlefield, morning television. Commentators debated whether Chuck should have been invited at all. Meanwhile, GMA's ratings skyrocketed for that episode, though they quietly scrubbed it from the YouTube replay. Behind closed doors, ABC executives debated future guest protocols. One memo read, "High-profile guests with controversial histories must be vetted with double clearance." The show's tone subtly changed. Fewer surprises, more fluff. George, once seen as the calm diplomat of morning TV, was now viewed as a man capable of being rattled. Chuck, for his part, embraced the fallout. He issued a statement, "I came to speak truth and left with my dignity intact." Merchandise even popped up on line shirts reading "Chuck Norris was too real for GMA." The cultural divide widened. Viewers were no longer just fans, they were ideological camps. It wasn't just an interview anymore, it was a referendum on what TV should be. Meanwhile, Chuck's charity saw a massive boost in donations. Over $2 million in a week. He attributed it to unintended exposure, but others whispered that maybe it was strategic, that maybe Chuck knew exactly what he was doing. That morning TV was too soft for the hard truths he wanted to share. Inside media circles, Chuck's name became a cautionary tale. "Don't book him unless you're ready for backlash," one producer said. But in Texas, veterans shelters and families reaped the benefit. "Say what you want about Chuck," one recipient posted, but he showed a hand, he delivered. In this strange swirl of scandal and service, Chuck had turned a media brawl into a charitable win. George, meanwhile, quietly resumed his usual interviews. But insiders said he never forgot that day. The day he went toe-to-toe with a legend and didn't come out clean. Months later, the Emmy committee announced GMA's nomination for Most Memorable Live Segment. The footage submitted. Chuck's interview, ABC didn't push for it, but fans did. It became the most rewatched segment of the season on unofficial platforms. A college in Florida even used it in a media ethics class. The professor asked who was wrong, and the students debated for an hour. The beauty of it all there was no simple answer. Chuck wasn't just a meme anymore. He was a media disruptor. George wasn't just a journalist. He was a figure, tested, and in the court of public opinion, the verdict changed with each viewer's lens. But one truth stood tall. Something real had happened on that stage, and it couldn't be undone. In the end. Chuck Norris left the studio without finishing his segment, but with a new title, The Man Too Uncensored for Live TV. George Stephanopoulos, carried on as the professional anchor but knew he'd gone viral for the wrong reasons. For once, it wasn't just about who spoke louder or smiled more. It was about what couldn't be edited out. America had watched two icons collide and walked away asking uncomfortable questions. What is truth? Who decides tone? And is morning TV still the place for real talk? Chuck had made his mark, not with fists but with facts and defiance. And George had learned, even in front of cameras, there's no controlling a storm once it starts, especially when the storm walks in, wearing boots. Weeks after the broadcast, Chuck Norris found himself trending again, but not just for controversy. Independent journalists began dissecting the full context of the GMA segment, slowing it down, comparing Chuck's tone with George's interruptions. One YouTube breakdown titled "The Ambush of Chuck Norris, Morning TV's Hidden Bias," gained over 5 million views in 3 days. It argued that the so-called interview was more of an ideological trap than a celebration of Chuck's charity. This sparked a new wave of online support. Hashtags like #LetChuckSpeak and #TruthRoundhouse began to appear across social media. Even those who didn't agree with his worldview admitted he had been set up. Meanwhile, George's silence only fueled speculation. Why hadn't he responded? Was he told not to?